The following program is complete nonsense. While the people and places are real, the events are entirely invented for comedy. Please do not cite this in your history paper, unless you want to fail creatively.
Everyone thinks the fall of Rome was complicated, a stew of inflation, invasions, incompetent emperors, and the occasional barbarian who couldn't take a hint. This is charming and wrong. The real cause was chocolate, specifically a long-distance relationship between Roman appetites and Aztec excellence that both sides denied, managed entirely by rumor, misreading, and the universal human weakness for something dark, bitter, and expensive. Let us begin where respectable textbooks begin, the early 5th century, when Emperor Honorius governed the Western Empire from Ravenna because Rome made him nervous. This part, I assure you, is accurate. Honorius loved safety, birds, and decrees. What he did not love was surprises. Unfortunately, the markets of the Mediterranean specialize in surprises, somewhere between Alexandria's grain ships and Carthage's olive oil invoices. A whisper arrived there existed far to the west a bean that, when ground and whisked with hot water, could produce a drink that made generals alert, senators agreeable, and tax collectors briefly popular. The Romans, who had already perfected aqueducts, roads, and the art of arguing in public, were intrigued. If Virgil could sing of arms and the man, why not of the cup and the bean? The rumor did not travel by miracle. It came in sensible increments. A Greek sailor with a notebook full of winds, a Phoenician logbook that mentioned dark kernels valued by kings, a battered amphora dredged from a beach in Hispania with a residue that, when licked by a curious customs officer, tasted suspiciously like ambition. In Mesoamerica, the Aztecs cultivated cacao and taxed it as tribute. Their pachteca, long-distance merchants, protected roots and guarded recipes. In Italy, the Senate practiced a different art, turning anything interesting into a committee. Thus, a committee was formed to investigate whether the West's mysterious bean might stabilize coinage, calm the army, and possibly make the Circus Maximus more bearable on hot afternoons. At this point, a practical obstacle appeared: money. The Roman government had plenty of coins and little credibility. The silver content of the denarius had been politely shrinking for generations, a habit that emperors considered resourceful and everyone else considered theft. Cacao, by contrast, had a reputation for steadiness. A bean was a bean, and no emperor could shave it thinner. You can see how this story was destined to end. A few clever financiers proposed a solution that only clever financiers could love. Rome would not buy beans. Too messy, but would buy promises of beans, beautifully written on wax tablets and vigorously traded. Futures, they called them, because they were constantly discussed in the tents of wishful thinking. The first month went well. Promises piled up. Senators congratulated themselves, and scribes copied the phrase "delivery west of Pillars of Hercules" until their hands cramped. Soldiers noticed that supply officers began replacing the word grain with aroma. Priests complained that auguries taken over cups of the new drink felt suspiciously optimistic. This was pure coincidence. By the second month, the empire was running to budgets: the normal one, funded by taxes and prayers, and a parallel one funded by speculative beverages. The parallel one was larger. Naturally, someone asked what to pay with. Coins were touchy. Merchants preferred certainty. A bright senator from an old family proposed an alternative: send Rome's most famous export gladiators as a diplomatic down payment. This was not as mad as it sounds. Gladiators were trained, charismatic, and could be counted. They also consumed a great deal of barley, and, unlike coins, did not melt in transit. The Senate drafted a decree in which gladiators were described as living invoices, and everyone clapped carefully. A small flotilla of ships left Ostia bearing amphorae of olive oil, bundles of legal language, and a delegation of athletes who were assured they were going to a festival. The West remained West, uncharted and stubborn, and the ships returned with nothing except stories and a troubling quantity of seagull droppings. The living invoices, now extremely seasick, were returned to their barracks and sworn to secrecy on pain of more boat rides, yet the damage was already done. Having announced to themselves that cacao was the answer, the Romans behaved as if it were already in stock. Debts were settled by reference to non-existent deliveries. Contracts were written in which the phrase "as sweetened by the gods" did more legal work than was polite. In Ravenna, Honorius signed off on a policy that would have been unthinkable in sturdier times. To stabilize morale, small portions of a substitute beverage, roasted barley with heroic marketing, were issued to select units. The men pretended to be energized. Their commanders pretended to believe them. The Goths did not pretend anything. They simply watched. If you place a magnifying glass over the year 408, the cracks are obvious. Stilicho, Rome's most capable general, had been executed in a fit of political hygiene. Legions were underpaid, and the Rhine frontier looked like an unattended shop. Into this uncertainty came the warm whisper of a Western cure. Merchants in Massilian Carthage began to accept cacao promises as collateral, because nothing says confidence like parchment. Warehouses filled with contracts stamped with seals of eagles, dolphins, and one extremely enthusiastic boar. A poet in Rome published a satire comparing senators to beans. Hard outside, soft within, expensive throughout. He was widely applauded and privately ignored. Then, exactly as the gods or market cycles prefer, weather intervened. Storms in the Atlantic delayed grain ships from Africa. Prices rose. A few bankers, suddenly less confident that the future would keep its promises, tried to convert their cacao paper back into coin. This proved awkward. Paper prefers to stay paper. A shortage of bronze for small change led to an embarrassing experiment with ceramic tokens shaped like laurels, which cracked in pockets and betrayed their bearers. Meanwhile, gossip traveled faster than caravans. In far Mesoamerica, it was said the rulers considered cacao a royal matter and would not let it be exported to foreign empires whose gods were confusing. This was both sensible and unhelpful. By the spring of 409, the contradiction was complete. Rome had a drink it had never tasted, a currency it could not redeem, and borders that required attention from men who were busy reading price bulletins. Enter Alaric, king of the Goths, who required no beverages to focus his mind. He approached Rome with professional courtesy, offered terms, and was told by men in good togas that the empire was on the cusp of a liquidity infusion. He had heard many Latin words. These were new. Negotiations continued. It is important to stress that Alaric was reasonable. He wanted payment and dignity. Rome wanted time and weather. There was talk of land in Illyricum, of titles, of theater tickets. But behind every promise lay the same arithmetic: if and when, and provided that the beans arrive. In a particularly delicate session, a Roman envoy attempted to explain cacao to a Gothic chieftain using gestures. The chieftain, polite, suggested that perhaps Rome could pay in the coin it had always paid: gold. The envoy laughed in a manner that made everyone nervous. The sack of Rome in 410 has been described by many witnesses, most of them stunned. It was not a total demolition. It was a demonstration of power. Churches were spared. Some houses were looted twice because the first Goths left the furniture crooked. The curious part, which few moderns recall, is the special attention paid to offices near the Forum, where records of contracts were stored. The Goths, realists, understood that paper is a kind of weapon. When they burned ledgers, they did not merely destroy sums, they erased certain kinds of hope. A senator later complained that it took months to reconstruct which future had belonged to whom. During those months, Rome discovered that, when the future is unclear, the present becomes inconvenient. And what of the gladiators, the living invoices? Their place in this story is delicate. Having been briefly repurposed as financial instruments, they returned to the arenas with a certain celebrity. Some had learned a few Nahuatl loanwords from a sailor, who claimed he had heard them in a dream. A fashion arose in which victorious fighters sprinkled barley with ground carob and announced to the crowd that it was the taste of the West. Spectators cheered and pretended to understand. Merchants sold tiny cups of something dark and expensive to senators who claimed to like it. No one admitted that it tasted like ambition with ash. In the provinces, governors improvised. In Gaul, taxes were accepted in wool, wine, and, for a brief period, recipes. In Britain, the last legions prepared to leave, their pay chests lightened by rumors and substitutes. A centurion wrote home that his men were disciplined and sober, but prone to comparing every problem to a beverage that none of them had seen. "We march," he concluded, "on faith and barley." In North Africa, where ships were loaded by men who understood schedules, The word cacao was added to a list of prohibited cargoes, somewhere between ivory and wishful thinking. The strangest debates occurred in the Senate after the sack. Some argued that the bean had saved Rome, because while citizens argued about flavor, they did not argue about treason. Others insisted that cacao had been a foreign plot designed to distract the empire from sensible vegetables. A third party, always the largest, proposed a commission. The commission's findings were as clear as they were soothing. In conclusion, Rome's greatness was intact. The beans were a fine idea, but perhaps best postponed, and it would help if the weather improved. The commission recommended more roads, fewer poems, and a complete inventory of anything that could be stacked in a warehouse and called collateral. Meanwhile, in Mesoamerica, the Aztec state continued to cultivate and tax cacao, to pour zocoltitl for rulers, and to treat the bean as a matter of taste and ceremony rather than an excuse for speculative paper. They did not send ships east. Why would they? The Pochteca had profitable routes to protect and little interest in arguments conducted in a language that called every foreigner a barbarian. The connection between their steady tribute system and Rome's nervous fiscal theater existed entirely in Roman heads, carried by rumor and stabilized by the oldest preservative of all. A lesser-known episode illuminates the comedy. During a lull in crises, Honorius issued a decree standardizing cups. It stated that in all public ceremonies, a vessel of exactly 1 sextarius would be used, so that no official could be seen to prefer a larger or smaller measure. The decree, reasonably intended to prevent jealousy, was seized by merchants as proof that the emperor endorsed a specific serving size for the Western drink. Traders began quoting prices per sextarius Ravenna standard. When an official attempted to correct the confusion, he discovered that corrections, like promises, rarely travel as far as rumors. It is tempting at this point to forgive everyone. Empires are staffed by people, and people prefer the future to the present. If a bean could steady an army and sweeten a budget, what harm could there be in a little anticipation? But the truth, which we will state with the calm of a marble statue and the accuracy of a weather vane, is that anticipation becomes policy faster than policy becomes reality. By the time an actual cacao bean could have crossed an actual ocean in an actual ship, Rome had already priced, poured, and partially forgotten the drink. The Goths, who favored simpler arithmetic, collected in gold and moved on. After Rome's humiliation, adjustments were made. The word cacao was banished from official documents, replaced by the neutral phrase Western considerations. Ledgers were rewritten. A new enthusiasm arose this time for spice monopolies in the East, which at least had the dignity of existing on the same map. Poets detected the shift and composed odes to pepper that read suspiciously like rebranded chocolate hymns. In private, senators sipped a hot mixture of barley, honey, and denial, and declared it bracing. Centuries later, when Spanish ships would actually cross to the lands of cacao and bring back both beans and bewilderment, Europe would pretend to be surprised. Italians, polite in victory as in defeat, would adopt coffee with exemplary seriousness, perhaps because it arrived with vessels, invoices, and an absence of committee rumors. The old Roman craving found a new object, this time blessed by timetables. In cafes, men argued politics with cups that did not require futures markets to taste real. Historians will say, this is coincidence. We, being helpful, will call it a lesson finally learned. You may ask, with the healthy suspicion that befits a citizen, whether any of this is provable. Of course not. Proof is for trials. This is history. We are here for a different service. To take the facts everyone agrees on, the anxiety of late Rome, the steadiness of Aztec cacao, the sack of 410, the human need for stimulating beverages, and arrange them in an order that explains everything while offending no one more powerful than a librarian. If your librarian is offended, offer them a cup of something dark and reassuring, and promise to footnote it later. So let us conclude, as any proper Roman would, with a moral stated as a regulation. Whereas the Roman Empire sought stability in a bean, it could neither see nor sip. Whereas the Aztec state maintained dignity by assigning value to the same bean without asking the Mediterranean for permission. And whereas Alaric preferred gold to beverages, be it hereby remembered that empires do not fall because of what they drink, but because of what they are certain they will drink tomorrow. And if you should ever find yourself tempted to fund your borders with futures, consult a weather report, a map, and a cup that can be filled today. This, finally, is why the fall of Rome had very little to do with swords and everything to do with taste. The Goths came for treasure. The Romans waited for delivery. The Aztecs, wisely, kept the recipe. And the rest of us, descendants of both paperwork and longing, sip our modern comforts, while promising ourselves that this time, unlike last time, we will not confuse anticipation with supply. It is a noble promise. It pairs well with something hot, bitter, and guaranteed to arrive on schedule.